And hello, everybody. It is so good to be here. Today it is January 15th, 2022, and I am so excited to be sharing how to find a good editor on Fiverr with the emphasis being on good. Today we have several different things that we're going to go over, so let me just go over them real quick and you know whether or not this video is good for you. If you're an indie author especially, then this might be one that I hope will help you in your editor seeking journey, because finding a good editor is like almost as good as important as finding a good agent, right? But let me start out just by saying that this video is not sponsored by Fiverr. I did get written permission from them prior to filming this to show you guys their software on the live, but it is not actually sponsored, so I'm not getting paid for this. But if Fiverr ever wanted to pay me, of course I'd be open and honest to that. However, I am a Fiverr seller, and I edit. So I've used Fiverr both as an author looking for editors and then as an editor myself. So today we're going to be touching on how to search for an editor on Fiverr, what the different levels of editing are, how to see what somebody's experience is once you've found them on Fiverr, and then the key points of a gig before you place your order. If you have technical support issues with Fiverr, I don't work for them. I can't help you with those. But if you have other questions that are author related, like how do you prevent finding an editor that will steal your work? That's one that I've seen a lot. Let me know. Or how important is it to get an editor who has a college degree versus someone who has lots of experience but no degree? So yeah, drop them in the chat. That's why I'm doing this live. So with that being said, let me share my screen. I've got Fiverr pulled up. Here we go. The first thing you're going to do when you go onto Fiverr is look for a gig. Gigs in Fiverr just means the kind of job that you want. In this case, I have pulled up my own personal profile, but you don't have to go straight to somebody's profile. You can go to Fiverr's home screen, which will allow you to type in fast editing or fantasy editing or fantasy proofreading or sci-fi proofreading or nonfiction proofreading. There's even beta reading, which is professional beta reading done usually by a developmental editor or some kind of book critic. I can't even talk today. Sorry, guys. On Fiverr, which is where I found both my developmental editor and my professional beta readers. And my cat wants to get all in on this. Okay, so once you have found somebody, I recommend that you actually go to their profile. You'll see gigs pop up in search, and a gig would be this that you see here. I will quickly proofread your fantasy or sci-fi novel. I don't often have my gigs open these days because I'm an editor for Autocrit, so I don't really have time to take side edits, but for the sake of this demonstration, I made it active so that you could see it. So you'll see a gig, but once you're in the gig, pull it up here, if you scroll down, you can see about this seller, which will give you their name. It will give you sort of their tagline, their star rating and how many of those that they have, a contact me button, and a basic overview of what you see on their profile. If you want to see more about them from there, you can actually click on their name in bold, which will take you to their profile, which is where we just were. And this shows you all the different kinds of gigs, because people like me who prefer to edit specific genres or do specific types of editing, we might have more than one gig, and maybe the gig you're looking for is not the one that you clicked, but you want to see if that person also does the other types of edits. So that leads into, what are the types of editing? There are five levels of editing for you to choose from. Some authors, especially indie authors, don't do all five. I personally have found a lot of value in doing all five, since I released 2 books that flopped because I didn't do all 5 down the line. And that was several years ago. And now that I know this industry and I know the process, I know the importance of getting editors. And you might be thinking, hey, I can self-edit myself. Yes, you can. You can self-edit to some extent. That's why I got into using Autocrit, the online editing tool, in the beginning as a user. But there's a little thing called page blindness, which is where your brain autocorrects typos and grammatical errors and automatically fills in plot holes that you won't catch yourself. So having a fresh set of eyes is really important. So the 5 levels are developmental. This does not touch on typos, grammatical errors, or anything like that. Developmental is looking for plot holes, character arcs, world building details, and things like that, the actual content of your work itself. And that is often the most expensive edit, but the most crucial edit. And if you're like me and you just can't afford it, a professional beta read, which does not have the same level of detail, but is still done by a professional, can be really helpful. You can always go to friends and other authors for beta reads, but a developmental editor is trained to give very specific feedback in our edits. For example, we say, I like this because you do this, this, and this well, because that then turns into constructive criticism you can use in other parts of your document. Or we say, this could be stronger if you did this, this, and this, or this might come across as this way or that way based on our experience in the field, versus more of a friendly beta reader who doesn't know all those ins and outs of the writing world, but is trying, who may just say, I don't like this scene, but they can't necessarily pinpoint the reasons behind it. So our goal as developmental editors is to sort of guide you into what's working and why, what isn't working and why not, and what might not come across the way you think it would. The next 4 levels are all technical. Technical means the grammar, the typos. There is line editing. Line editing is super helpful to make your book read smoother. It involves sentence by sentence rewording, not necessarily that your book is going to be bulldozed and completely rewritten by an editor. That's not why we're here. It's more, this sentence would sound more natural, or like something someone would actually say if you said it this way, or you changed where your verb and your adverb are, or something like that. Your copy edits are next after line edit, and this is where most indie authors pick up, because most indie authors just can't afford a line edit, or we have read so much that our books just sort of flow naturally like a line edit. And in my case, I use the Autocrit software to help me with my line edit. But a copy edit focuses on grammatical errors, typos, paragraphs that are not indented correctly, capitalizations that aren't the same throughout the whole piece, switching from first person to third person or present tense to past tense. It is one of the most vital edits that you can have as an author, and I highly recommend investing in a copy edit if you don't do anything else, if you're planning to self-publish. If you're going to traditionally publish, you don't necessarily have to do a copy edit, because the publisher has an editing team that's going to do all these edits for you. But if you're going to self-publish, you are your own editing team, and so you have to outsource it. The last key one that most people know is a proofread, and that is what the gig you see on your screen in front of you is today, that I do on Fiverr from time to time, but haven't done in a while. Proofreading is the last check. They are not going to do the same level of detail as a copy editor. So if your book has a lot of run-on sentences, or your book has mismatched capitalizations throughout the entire piece, or things like that, chances are they are not all going to be caught by a proofreader. A proofread is simply to catch glaring typos, glaring grammatical errors, and occasionally some other aspects of the story, like, hey, half of your paragraph's on the wrong page, or something like that, or maybe you cut off a sentence halfway. A proof in the publishing world is the version of your book that's going to print. So you have already edited it, you have already formatted it, at least in Word, maybe not your official PDF format yet, but it's getting ready to go to print as a proof. So that's what your proofreader is for, to read your proof. I've seen people come back and go, hey, this proofreader didn't do all of these line edits. Well, a proofreader's not supposed to do line edits. It's not a way to get a discounted line edit to go to a proofread. A lot of those issues are still going to stay there if you don't get the correct editor. And not all of us cross over. Like I do developmental editing, copy editing, and proofreading, but I try to avoid line editing because I just like to maintain as much of an author's original voice as they can. And while I can technically do it, it's just not as enjoyable for me to do a line edit, so I normally don't. Other authors only do developmental edits for content. Other authors only do technical edits. So definitely check on that when you look at gigs. The last one is a galley proof. A galley is the version of your book that will be printed. So this should be your formatted, finished, complete manuscript. You've already had all the other edits. It's ready to print as is. The galley proofer is more looking for errors that your formatter made to make sure that the drop caps are in the right place and there's no random italics or words cut off anywhere, than they are proofreading errors, although they will usually note gross, as in very obvious proofreading errors. But by the time you get to a galley proofer, after having 4 other types of edits and self-editing, there really should not be that many typos. I think I had 13 in the last book that got galley proofed. So, yay! I had over 3,000 when I started. I ended with 13, and I think my readers have found 2. And that's an important piece too. Even traditional authors have typos in their books. I won't name any names, but one about certain sparkly vampires is notorious for the number of typos in the book. But fans still love it. Most fans will skim right over it and not even notice. You just don't want to have typos in sentence 1 of the first paragraph like I did with one of the books I didn't get edited. Yeah. So now we've gone over the types of editing. You know that when you go to a profile that you can look at that editor's gigs and see which ones they do. I always say there's a red flag when an editor claims to do all the editing in one gig for one key reason. It takes time to do an edit and do it well. To do a 100,000 word fantasy novel in a proofread and have nothing else, no life, just literally all day long proofread, you might be able to get it done in a couple days. But most of us want to eat, most of us want to sleep, most of us want to do other things too. So we have lives and we edit 8 hours a day because it's our job. So I would be very skeptical of somebody that says, I can do a developmental edit and a copy edit and a proofread and have it back to you in 72 hours. Developmental edit of a full novel takes me 1 to 2 weeks on average. And I know that there are several other editors in this field that are similar or longer in length. Beta reads are a little quicker, but the high level edits take time. And if you get an editor that's doing their job right, they should do multiple run-throughs of your book. They should be looking for things like round 1 is going to look for all the capitalization and title errors and words that are not consistent, like words you make up that aren't spelled the same. Round 2 is going to be grammar. Round 3 is going to be typos. And each time you put it down and you rest and you come back to it, that way you catch everything freshly. So yeah, make sure that the editor you're picking, that it makes sense how they could be turning out what they're turning out in their time frame, and look at their reviews. I have 41 reviews. They are all 5-star. They are a mix of proofreading from when I did proofreading and beta reading from when I did beta reading up on Fiverr. And you can read all their different opinions. You're looking for things like how good a job did they do, obviously. You're looking for how often they turn in their work on time or early. You don't have a lot of reviews saying, she's constantly pushing back my book, she's constantly delivering late. Those are all things to notice when you first look. Look for an editor who is from the country that you're wanting to release your book in, if you want it to be native to there, or somebody that has experience doing multiple kinds. So in my case, I went to editing courses in college and I learned how to edit UK English, Canadian English, Australian English, and American English. And that is all in my bio. So readers know here are the 4 that I do the most. If you're from North Africa, yes, I could edit your book, but do I know all the style guides that are in North Africa? Not necessarily. So you have to tell me which style guide you want me to use. You want to see how long they've been on Fiverr. I have been working on Fiverr since October 2015. You can see their average response time. A few hours is ideal, and how long ago their last deliveries were. You can also see their Fiverr scores and what they've taken. So, for example, down here I have taken a test in both Japanese and English. I rated fluent in Japanese because that's my second language, and then English. I do not edit in Japanese though, if you're watching. They have their skills, their education, any certifications, and that will all show up here on Fiverr for you. So you should have an idea of who this editor is. Don't feel obligated to hire an editor just because they are nice, or they have a pretty face, or they have a pretty gig photo, as much as I love my gig photo, or they have lots of reviews. Every editor edits in a different style, and depending on what you're needing them for, you may have to reach out to them and actually ask them to do a sample for you, which should be a 3 to 5 page sample that you pay them $5 or $10 for, because they work, this is their time, and they're going to put the same level of effort into their sample that they would do for anybody else. It is totally normal in this industry for a good editor to charge a very small fee to do a sample. So ask for a sample, send in your book, see if you like what they do. If you're not sure what level of editing your book needs, you can click the contact button and contact that seller and say, I don't know what kind of editing my book needs. Is this something you could do? Would you look at it for me for a sample gig? And they can do an analysis of it for you. The first couple pages alone will usually tell us what level of editing the book needs. And then from there, the seller can say, yes, I can take it. No, I can't take it. Or here's a recommendation to somebody else. My biggest piece of advice, if you don't take anything else away from the live today, is to always contact the seller and be in constant communication with the seller throughout your editing process. Editing is not a gig that you should ideally come out of the blue, not chat with the editor, don't look at who they are, place a random order, and then hope for the best. Because editing is expensive. It's an investment. And what happens if you get it back and you don't like the version of editing that this person does? Maybe they look a little too much into certain typos. Maybe they have not upgraded to the Chicago Manual of Style's newest edition and they're still using Oxford commas and you didn't want Oxford commas. Or maybe they are using the new version and you're like, I want Oxford commas, even though that's not done in Chicago Manual of Style anymore, or even the Oxford Manual of Style anymore. So having that up front is very important. So just contact the seller, ask if they are able to take your project, tell them what your project is about, and ultimately make sure that you're going to a seller that works with your genre, because as I'm about to show you, they will always usually say what genres they take and what their turnaround time is like. So with that said, let's move on into the gig itself and look over what are some signs of a gig that you want to pay attention to. And I'm by no means saying that I'm the master of gig creation. I have been successful on Fiverr as an editor, but I am addressing this live as a author who finds and has spent a lot of money on Fiverr for my editors. When I find an editor on Fiverr, the very first thing that I look at is what is included in their gigs. Let me make sure that my screen's carried over so that you can still see. Yes, okay. So there are 3 packages that most people use. Those packages vary by turnaround time, by word count, and other aspects. So for me, I have 3 basic gigs. I have one that's up to 50,000 words, one that's up to 100,000 words, and one that is up to 175,000 words. My prices change depending on the market and demand. And as I said, most of the time this gig isn't up for me right now because I work for AutoCrit, but you can find other editors the same way. So here, okay, I will turn around your 50,000 word novel. Oh, this is a flash to the past in 4 days. This is before I worked for AutoCrit and had all the time in the world. In 4 days, I'll turn around your 50,000 word novel for just a proofread, not a copy edit, not a line edit, no critique, just typos and grammatical errors. This up to amount is fixed. If you submit a gig to a editor and you're like, well, my book is 70,000 words, but that's closer to 50 than it is to her next level, which is 100. The seller can request a cancellation because you did not follow the gig requirements. Or they can ask you to pay more money if you want your whole gig. If your book doesn't fit into a bucket, my suggestion is to go click Contact Seller on the page, tell them your word count, and get a custom quote. If you want more or less than what they are offering as part of their default gig, like here, if maybe you want proofreading, but you also want me to make sure that your tone is consistent, and you also want a structural edit, which means you want to make sure that all those capitalizations match up, and you want to make sure that your light line editing is done. I do those, but I do those for an extra charge, and that's not going to be something you get if you just place the basic order here. This is the simplest of simplest edits. So yeah, up to 50,000 words, proofreading only. There's nothing else on there. Some editors offer revisions, but many do not, because there's nothing really to revise. We're not creating content. It's not like a line editor where you say, hey, I'd like it better if you wrote it like this. We're literally just following whatever manual style you told us to make sure that it meets the industry standards for typos and grammatical errors in a proofreading case. I chose this gig because fantasy and sci-fi, my book is a fantasy, look for genre specific editors, especially professionals, because they know the industry. They are likely readers. Some of them are authors. They're going to have really great experience with your specific genre. Another key point is to look in at their portfolio. So, and aside from the pretty image that will likely catch your attention, you should also scroll through and see what some of the differences are. So I was just telling you about proofread versus the extra, the tone consistency and the structure, like a light copy edit. Here's an example of proofread only, what that looks like. Here's an example with all that other stuff added in. So you have a clear look at what their work is, and you get a feel for their tone, even if you don't send them a sample edit. They should always have portfolios. If there is no example of their work, that to me is a huge red flag, because it means they either have not done work or they don't have a good enough relationship with their buyers to share blacked out versions of their work, or they're not wanting you to see their work. They're being secretive about it for some reason, and all of those are bad. Even if the sample they give you is your own example by sending to them and requesting, they should be willing to provide you samples of their work without telling you have to buy the whole gig in advance. Once you look through their portfolio and you say they look good, the price fits for me, the turnaround time and what's included, that works for me, you can get more information by scrolling down to about this gig, and it will tell you the key details about what that gig is for, what to expect from it and what not to expect from it. So I have my Fiverr account on here. I work for an editing company. I've been editing for 10 years on the side and have over 5 years of editing training in high school and college. So yeah, I actually took formal college courses. I cannot understate the importance of having somebody who actually has training and is not just a self-taught editor, Though there's nothing necessarily wrong with a self-taught editor as long as they've looked up the style guides and they know the style guides. Style guides change, and they change sometimes as often as annually. What I'm doing now for Chicago Manual of Style is not what I was doing when I did Chicago Manual of Style in college. They're on the 17th edition now, and it just is different. So you want to make sure that this is a person that is taking courses and at least is comfortable with the manuals of style. You should see which manuals of style they use. So in my case, my defaults are Chicago Manual of Style for US, Oxford Style Guide for UK, Cambridge Editorial Style Guide for Canada, and if you have something else, you have to actually mention it in your gig requirements. It tells you what the gig is for, tells you what there are add-ons for, so you know, oh, she's not going to offer anything else at all, or she offers this. And then in my case, my selling point was that I could do a very good job in a quick turnaround because at that time I wasn't doing anything else but raising my firstborn son. Now I have 2 kids. So yeah. This gig is especially for fantasy and sci-fi. Pro tip, don't go ask the editors to work on your other genre book if it is not listed. Check out their profile and see if they have your gig listed somewhere else. But if they don't, chances are they just don't work with it. You could have the best proofreader in the world, and if they don't like reading romance, or they don't like reading horror, or they don't do nonfiction, or they don't do fiction, then your book may not receive the same level of quality as it deserves. And there's a big difference in editing between nonfiction and fiction. For example, instead of Chicago Manual of Style, you might see MLA, you might see APA, so it does make a difference in the quality of editing you're going to get back. And then check for any file requirements. This is often overlooked. When we go looking for an editor, we don't even think about it because we work in our books every day. But make sure they work with the kind of document that you plan to send. In order to do an edit, they have to have an editable document. I know that sounds like common sense, but honestly, there are people who are afraid that an editor's going to steal their books, so they send them a PDF. Well, I can't edit it in PDF. I can't make any changes. So a PDF would have to be converted, and then that's a process in and of itself. If you're worried about your work being stolen, I say this with the utmost respect as somebody whose work was stolen and put up on pirating sites last year. I highly suggest that you finish all of your content that you plan to do for that moment and you get it registered, a pre-registration with the Copyright Office, which is what I did. And that turned out to be enough. When my book ended up on a very large pay-for chapter website last year, I copied my pre-registration notice. I sent it to the website with a takedown request, and they took it down. And they were very gracious about it. But it's nerve-wracking because you know that somebody you sent it to had to have given it out. So yeah, pre-registration is helpful if you're in the US. No, it does not stop people from copying your book. You'll never be able to 100% stop people from copying your book. But having a copyright registration is the only way you're going to legally have anything to stand on in the background. Now, if you're watching this and you're international and you don't have that problem because your courts recognize whoever created the content and can prove it, then you're good. Just keep your copies. But yeah, I have not had to date issues with editors. I do use a system to watermark and put tracking links in my documents now so I can see exactly who I gave it to that put my books out, which is definitely worth the $80 a year that I am spending on that program. But I've never had an editor on Fiverr take my document and publish it, and I can say as an editor, I am too busy editing too many books and working on my own books to have the time to poach anybody's story and put it up anywhere. So yeah, just normally it's a non-issue. I have had it happen to me, but it was an easy fix with the pre-registration. So I hope that puts your mind at ease. Um, if you had any issues with the seller, of course, you can reach out to Fiverr as well. So scrolling down, make sure you look at their language is English, their genre, and that matches up with what you're wanting to do. A lot of authors have several genres. I purposefully only worked with sci-fi and fantasy because those are the only ones I could do fast. If I had to proofread a religious fiction, for example, even though I was raised religious, it would take me 2 weeks to a month to do the same edit that it would take me to do sci-fi or fantasy, because sci-fi and fantasy just flows better for me as an editor. So know that those genres matter in your turnaround time. You can compare packages down at the bottom to see the overview and see some of the add-ons they have. Like, okay, I'll do this for you in half the time for an added cost. And then there's usually an FAQ. And this FAQ is really important because it gives you an insight to the editor you're going to be working with. For example, is there anything you won't or don't read? Fiverr terms of service are very specific. I will read anything that does not violate Fiverr's terms of service. I'm not going to read those terms of service off to you because they are long. So if you want to read them, go to Fiverr's website and pull them up. But basically, as you see here, no abuse or intimacy, consensual or otherwise, involving minor children under age 18. All of that is explicitly forbidden in Fiverr's terms of service. If you send it to me, I cannot edit it. So cut it out before you send it to me, and then you can reinsert it later if you insist on having it in your book. That's not a personal decision, that's a terms of service decision, and I don't want my account deleted. Also, rape or incest of adults is not allowed in Fiverr's terms of service. Then personally, I prefer not to read highly explicit erotica or heavily detailed torture scenes. Light erotica is fine. Some non-super detailed torture scenes are fine too. I'm a dark fantasy author, so my tolerance goes a pretty long way, but I don't need to know what all the different tendons are named in a torture scene. You can see what versions of English that I read here. You can see what manuals of style. You can see the differences for the types of editing, and I put in my FAQ whether or not I even offer the other types of editing as part of that gig. So that is pretty much all the information, besides reading through all the reviews, obviously, and deciding that this is a person that's good to work with. If this person has an active order, which of course I don't right now, it would say up here next to the star count and reviews, 1 order in queue, 2 order in queue, 3 orders in queue. That gives you an idea of how many people you have ahead of you. To me, that affects my pricing and not my turnaround time, which is important to note. Follow an author. If you come to me and you see that I had 6 orders in queue, back during my busiest season on Fiverr, I had 45 full beta reads in December of 2019. 2020. I'm getting all mixed up with the new year. December 2020, I had 45 full fantasy and sci-fi beta reads to do for Fiverr. At the most, I had 15 in queue at one time. And when that happens, to make it worth the fact that I was literally only getting 4 hours of sleep a night and was reading my heart out the rest of the time, pretty much 24 hours a day, including meals sitting there at the computer, my prices went up, because you are paying to get me to do this service at a premium rate for a premium time when it's super busy. Versus January and February, when it gets a little slower, prices might go down a little bit. So some authors will raise their prices because they have to. Otherwise, we get so many gigs that we couldn't take anymore, and we would start being late, and that would be a problem. Other authors will cap their gigs, meaning you can't even order because they have 4 gigs in queue. So check out that queue and ask yourself, if there's 15, can I wait 2 weeks and come back? Or send the editor a message and say, I see you have 15 orders in queue. Is there a slower time where I could send it in? Yeah, great way to meet an editor from the beginning that way, and also to set yourself up for the best price, possibly to get a coupon from sellers, now that there's some pro sellers on Fiverr that can send out coupons as well. If you have a big project that needs to be done in milestones, like you want a developmental edit and you want a copy edit and you want to proofread, there are now milestones in Fiverr, so they can create you, I'm going to do this section, and then you have X amount of time to turn it around to me, and then I'm going to do this section and this section and this section. So it's really nice. So that is my advice on how to find a good editor in Fiverr. I do not have Fiverr's permission to show you other editor profiles, so I will respect that. If you do want to see other editors that I have used, feel free to drop me a message on Instagram or Facebook or on my website, and I will reply back to you with some examples of people I use. They are not all accepting work right now, but they usually do off and on throughout the year. But my developmental editor I found on Fiverr. One of my line editors I found on Fiverr, although I haven't had a user since AutoCredit. Sorry. My copy editor is not on Fiverr, although I do have a couple on Fiverr for my publishing house, Starry Ink Press. My proofreaders are on Fiverr, and my galley proofer is on Fiverr. So I can personally attest, now that I have 2 novellas and a novel out and more on the way, that I have found huge success. But searching through the mire of editing options on Fiverr has been tough, and the key points to take away from this is make sure they have either experience or a technical background, make sure that their portfolio has examples, make sure that the type of editing that they're doing is the type you're wanting and that you're okay with that price and turnaround time, and ultimately, do they do your manual of style? If they don't know what a manual of style is, you don't want them to be your editor. No offense to any editors watching this who are like, I didn't know. If you don't know, there's so many good courses you can take. If you're an author who's dabbling in editing and maybe you want to be an editor full time, go look up Chicago manual style classes. There's tons of them. You can even go get an official certification without getting an entire bachelor's degree from different colleges to get those manuals of style certifications. So it just really adds to your level. And one final thing that I'm looking at the screen and I'm like, oh, how did I not mention that? Is, does their gig have typos? You are an editor's bread and butter, their income. They're helping you put your book out there to make sales and bring in your income. But if they can't market themselves well enough to not have typos in their own gig description, how can you trust them to edit yours? That is so important. You can have a really nice person who sends you back a document filled with typos, and that would really suck, because then you have to let that person down and not go back to them for future books. You could be potentially getting bad reviews, and the whole time it could have been avoided by just reading their gig and saying, you got a lot of typos in your gig. I don't feel confident with that. You don't even have to engage with them that way. Before you even contact them, read their description. Make sure that their description is accurate before choosing to go forward with their services. So that's it. That is how you find a good editor on Fiverr. I hope that this helps some other indie authors that are where I was about this time last year, and I was lost and had no idea what I was doing, and begging for recommendations. You can always ask your friends for recommendations for editors, but Fiverr is a little cheaper. A lot of us that are professional editors, like I said, would take side gigs on Fiverr because we're in a down season. That means that you might get a publishing house editor to do your gig, but you have to wait until the off season to do it. So it's entirely circumstantial. Make sure you favorite your favorite editors and come back to them later on if they're not available right then, or message them and say, "Are you coming back?" But yeah, if you have questions and you're not on the live, drop them in the comments and I will try to answer them. This video will go up on YouTube. It's the second video in my behind the scenes of an indie author series. The first one was about Canva and how to use it, and you can find it in my YouTube channel now. Next week's is actually going to be about how to use Klaviyo, which is a email processing company that you can use to set up newsletters and stuff like that. And then the week after that, I'm actually going to show you guys AutoCrit and how I used it as an indie author to keep from having to pay my line editor for that book. So yeah, thank you all for joining. I hope you have a great weekend. Bye.